Hello, everybody. My name is Talin Marderosian, and today DataPoint Armenia will be holding its webinar with Lana Yeganova. Lana, please introduce yourself and introduce your educational background and career journey.
Hi, Talin. Thank you, DataPoint Armenia, for inviting me for this webinar. So I will take back to 1995. Armenia was suffering the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. We had very little electricity and heat and water, and I'm sure you've heard that story before. And there I was at that time. I was a recent college graduate with bachelor's degree in math, and there was no demand for someone like me. So one attractive option was to go back to school. And at that time, AUA has opened its doors in Armenia, and it gave to me and many of my friends not only warm home and acceptance and two memorable years in our lives, but also a ticket to a very exciting future. One of the classes I was taking was in linear programming. It was taught by a professor from the George Washington University, who then became my advisor. And then at AUA, he suggested and encouraged me to apply for a graduate school, which I did. And I found myself 2 years later accepted for a PhD program at the George Washington University. After graduating, I started my career at NIH. And believe it or not, I've been there ever since. My career is scientific. I started there as a young researcher and matured, or I'm still maturing, I guess it's an ongoing process, into a scientist. But we work in an organizational setting, which allows us to work not only on problems that are of pure academic and research interest, but also on the problems that can be immediately applied to the production system that we work on, and that system is PubMed. And so, as part of scientific career, it's really interesting because you are on the forefront of the science, you get exposed to state-of-the-art methods, and you're pushed to do cutting-edge problems. It includes organizing and co-organizing scientific events and conferences and collaborating with people all over the world. So, recently I actually had opportunity to teach at AUA. I taught during the data science summer school, which was very exciting. And I hope that in future, my career journey will include Armenia in a more significant way.
That's very fascinating. You gave a little background on the fact that you work at the NIH. Could you explain more in detail what you do or how data science has affected how you work in your daily life?
Yes, sure, I would love to. So my research is biomedical natural language processing. We call it NLP, which means we work on biomedical text. Scientific publications from all over the world in the areas of biology, medicine, and related fields are deposited into our digital library, and PubMed provides access to these publications. So right now we have around 32 million documents that are available in PubMed, and PubMed is basically a search engine with smart features with which you can search. So basically our job is to teach machine how to understand human language. And in our case, it is scientific biomedical language. It is actually pretty fascinating as we observe how you teach machine to understand as you feed it large amount of text and an algorithm, and it computes and it behaves like it's understanding. So, and all of that is done through units of textual information, which are words, and we're looking at words, at their co-occurrences, the context in which they occur, by supplying machine with different methods and creative algorithms. So the biomedical text that we're dealing with is quite different from general text. And one may ask, why don't just use general language models or general NLP methods for your problem? And what happens is that biomedical text is enriched in biomedical entities that are very, very specific to that field. So for example, it's enriched with gene names, protein names, diseases, and chemicals and mutations. And for that reason, models that are developed for general text do not translate well directly to biomedical text or any other specific text for that reason. So examples of some of the problems that we're working on are, for example, the simplest to comprehend is a classification problem. Given a COVID article, for example, we want to identify, is that article on transmission, or is that article on diagnosis, or is that article on epidemiology? So this would be an example of classification problem. Another type of problems that we work on are named entity recognition problems. And as I mentioned, entities of biomedical interest are gene names, protein names, and diseases. And once you're able to identify them, the next layer of complexity becomes, can we identify relationships between these entities? For example, can we find in a text evidence that this gene is associated with this disease, or can we find an evidence that two drugs interact in the text? Another type of problems that we're working on are clustering and topic modeling. For example, you have a huge amount of text, thousands of scientific publications. How can you quickly run clustering or topic modeling algorithms and identify the landscape of that body of literature? In fact, I want to mention a work that we did recently on COVID. We thought it's very important to address this issue because the amount of literature on COVID that was submitted to our system was growing like a snowball. At the beginning of February, we had only a handful of articles, like 40 articles. And in mid-May, when we looked at the data, we had like 14,000 articles. And the amount of data almost doubled every 20 days. In fact, I checked today is already 24,000 articles on COVID. So we thought it's really important to support scientific community by understanding what are the big things that this corpus of literature is discussing and help researchers with that knowledge. So what we did, we applied some of the tools that we have in our toolkit to that literature. And this is an interesting study because we got to apply a variety of tools on that database and see what we can see in that data. So we applied named entity recognition and we identified what are the diseases that co-occur in the literature with the term COVID, or we looked at the symptoms that are frequently mentioned in that literature. We also looked at clusters that were produced from that data, and some of the clusters are big and long clusters, and they're spanning the whole time frame from February to mid-May. And then also you can see other clusters that are smaller, that are just emerging in the beginning of May. And so all that, I think, creates a very interesting description of what can be done with text and how it can be used by scientific community. I'm going to move to the second part of your question, which I think it was how it impacts our daily lives. So I have to say the emerging of field of data science did not impact our daily lives for one reason, because we were doing data science. I think, at the beginning of millennium, there was so much data and there were many researchers that were trying to do something interesting with that data. And we were also doing very interesting things with that data. And because of all that research, I think it gave birth to data science. So we've been doing, and we continue to do data science.
Very well said. I was wondering, from the beginning of your career till now, how has the use of data science changed in your role in the things you were describing? Have you always been using the, advanced classification and etc. things since the beginning, or is this a new kind of revelation?
No, we've been using this method since the beginning, since before. Well, it's difficult to define when is the beginning, because like 30 years ago and 60 years ago, there also was some statistics done which mimics what data science is doing now, of course, with older methods. But we've been doing that. For example, I think already in 2001, we had that feature in PubMed where, so in PubMed is a search engine, right? So you enter a query and you find a document that you're interested in on biomedical topic. And then PubMed lists for you articles that are similar in the meaning, that do not necessarily contain your query terms, but are similar in the meaning. So this feature is similar to what Amazon is doing now with similar articles. But I think they're basing it on clicks, where our computation is based on the content of the document. And we had that already in basically pre-data science era. But I have to mention that clearly the methods have changed significantly. And
yeah. Along the same lines of that, have you, since 2001, have you seen any changing trends, as you were mentioning? Like how has the data science field changed over time until now?
Yeah. So in my view, one of the most important changes was in our field was the new generation of algorithms that are neural network-based algorithms. We also refer to them as deep learning algorithms. And they affected many fields, but they also affected NLP. And in my view, the groundbreaking effect that it had in the field is in the way we represent words. So historically, we would represent words as binary variables. Two words are either exactly the same or they are different. And there was no other measure of proximity to compare the meaning between the words. You could still compare the documents because based on how many words they have in common. But for example, related words such as gene and genetic are perceived by computer as different words. What neural network-based algorithms instigated was that now we started representing words with a vector. So now words are represented with 50, 100, or 200 dimensional vector. And these vectors are learned from the text by these algorithms. And using these vectors now, using these vector representations, you can compute how similar are the words with each other. And that is, I believe, is a fascinating change. Of course, the ongoing problem is now how to improve computation of these word vectors, or how to devise a better function to compare these vectors. But this is incremental. The groundbreaking change was in word representations. Another more recent shift in the field was transfer learning. Transformers such as BERT replaced this RNN architecture, and pre-training on big amounts of data and then fine-tuning on your specific data also became a dominant learning strategy.
That's very fascinating. Kind of along those lines, do you think from all of these changes that you've seen, the algorithms of the neural networks, do you think we've seen the biggest changes that we're going to see, like the most impactful developments, or do you think that there's a long ways to go?
So I think the impact comes from several disciplines developing in their directions, in their own directions, but then when you can put them together, that creates a bigger impact. For example, I'm thinking of self-driving cars, right? They need several things to work well in order for self-driving car to be safe and reliable. So these include computer vision and other fields to develop really well. And then when these developed pieces come together, this is where we can observe really a huge progress in the science.
Yeah, absolutely. I have another question kind of going towards your AUA experience. What was it like teaching the younger generation through the summer school program? What were your impressions?
Yes, it was very exciting. First of all, it was very exciting to go back and to teach in my alma mater. But the qualities of students are really amazing because we have students that are very motivated, and they were asking very good questions. They were paying attention. We really have very good asset, and we have to do our best to teach them and to train them and to elevate data science field in Armenia.
Yeah, that's very inspiring to hear that you had a good experience teaching at your alma mater. And now I would kind of like to, in the same direction, ask what you think are the current needs in terms of professional field of data science, even within Armenia specifically.
Mm-hmm. So I would say that the needs of the field are probably a good data scientist and a laptop. And then I can elaborate on what I think makes a good data scientist, if you're interested.
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
Okay. Well, see, data science, it's an interesting field because it stands on intersection. It is very applied field, and it really requires several different skills. Of course, your background in mathematics or computer science or related field prepares you well for that computational component of data science. But as a data scientist, we have to build bridges with the domains for which we're computing data science. And these are softer skills, but also very technical. If I think of a life cycle of a data science project, I think of, data acquisition part, and then you're deciding what experiments you're doing, and computational part. And the third part is interpreting your results. And to me, all of these pieces are very important to a successful data science project. Data acquisition part requires a very good understanding of what is your data, what are the characteristics of the data, where it comes from, how it was computed, the details of under which it was computed. And it all matters because we have faced this in our daily life. Sometimes we will compute data, we will run the experiments, and we'll look at results and something doesn't look quite right. And we go back and we understand, oh, we missed this when we were collecting the data, so we will do the experiment again. And so it really, your data shouldn't be, it's your role as a data scientist to validate your data and to make sure that there are no biases in that data and that it is trustworthy and you understand what it represents. Because whatever you compute is based on the data. If your data has a bias, then your results will be biased too. And so I think as a data scientist, we have to pay close attention and either understand domain ourselves or have good communication with experts in the field so that to make sure that we understand the data is trustworthy and it is collected in the right way. And then, of course, our technical part is to run the algorithm and to choose what is the best to address this kind of question. And then we generate a bunch of results. As a data scientist, sometimes we get more results than we know what to do with them. And so to tease out what does this mean, what do these results mean, also requires an understanding of domain or talking to the experts in this domain. So we can observe some correlations between the variables, but what does that really mean and how that applies to the field? I think that is important bridge. And to become valuable as a data scientist, I think we have to consider all this cycle and all these pieces. Only once we can apply this project successfully to a field, we can call it a successful data science project. And in general, I want to conclude by saying that really data science is driven by your creativity and by your imagination. It's up to you to ask questions of the data, and what questions you ask of the data will matter. So be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think that this was a very insightful conversation. I just want to thank you for taking the time out to come and do this webinar with us. And I hope that we will see further developments within Armenia and within the field of data science in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I wish you best of luck in your endeavors.
Thank you.